Some folks have to leave, but we're delighted that some of you can stick around for about 10 minutes of reflections, not just on this afternoon, but on the incredible week we've had together. My name is Tom Banchoff. I'm Vice President for Global Engagement here at Georgetown, Director of our Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, and a co-convener of the Georgetown Global Dialogues, along with my friend Pankaj Mishra, who's also going to say a few words. And Nesreen, you just heard her brilliant reflections. She's going to also weigh in just for a few minutes about the experience of the dialogues and where we are now, because we really do see this as a process. It began a year ago as an idea. A lot has happened in the world. That idea was to enrich the dialogue here on campus and here in Washington, D.C. by bringing leading intellectuals from around the world, from the global south, to reflect with us in the spirit of a culture of encounter on the challenges facing humanity. And we've seen it as the beginning of something. And Pankaj, I wonder what your reflections are about where we are now in this process. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. And sorry, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Well, hard to obviously encapsulate in a couple of minutes, but it occurred to me, just today, listening to the panels this afternoon, and, again, sort of confirming an intuition I've had for some time that we are, certainly, everyone agrees that this is an unprecedented conjuncture, and we are looking at what I would describe as sort of a de-Americanization of intellectual life. What do I mean by that? I think, the whole idea behind this global dialogues was very simply to bring some intellectual trends or some intellectual movements occurring outside the United States. Sometimes, there's some overlap with also the United States, but occurring and mostly intellectual trends and movements like, degrowth, communism of the kind, Kohei ideas, the ideas he offered, that are not usually heard in the mainstream, and people recoil from them because they carry the word, the very threatening word, communism. But as he explained, there's much more to it than we might think. So the idea was to bring these sort of unfamiliar notions, unfamiliar movements and trends. And obviously, this is a project that started in many ways a long time ago in the early 20th century with the anti-colonial movements who were pushing back against a certain monopolization of knowledge. And let's not forget the anti-colonial movement was not only a movement for political self-determination, it was also for a new way to think about political arrangements, economic arrangements, something Ranjit pointed out in his contribution today. And for various reasons, too many to go into, that never quite took off. The Cold War started soon after decolonization. Intellectual endeavor came to be concentrated in this country and in Western Europe. And there were resources, obviously, these are extremely wealthy countries, to build massive infrastructures, think tanks, area studies, departments. So the so-called third world could never truly match the enormous investment made in this country in ideas, in policy frameworks, in ideologies. Today, we are looking at the end of that moment. Those ideologies have become, or increasingly look, dysfunctional, defunct, unworkable, undesirable. But at the same time, I wouldn't say that we, those of us with Global South ancestry, can claim that we are ready to offer new ideas and new solutions. That moment has also passed, that moment that came in the early 20th century, because we don't have leaders of the kind who were certainly involved in the anti-colonial movement and had actual experience of what it is like to live in a world made by imperialism. We are looking at, autocratic leaders in various parts of the world. So many of us from the Global South are actually homeless in an odd way. The intelligentsias are homeless. So thought itself has become homeless in this country. Not only the political classes, but also increasingly we find at universities a certain kind of authoritarian tendencies taking over. An economics professor can be handcuffed and dragged away. We saw that yesterday. So there's a kind of wider assault on intellectual life, on intellectuals in general. So I suppose, a venture like that, perhaps, this is a new thought I've had today, is an attempt to find a new home for the homeless intellectuals, for the homeless thinkers, Anyway, I'll stop there and ask Nasreen what she thinks.
I'm going to talk about can you hear me? I'm going to talk about my experience. I don't have Pankaj's eloquence to talk about the history of the intellectual moment that we're in, but I can talk about the history of the past 5 days. And when I began talking to Tom and Pankaj about this a few months ago, I imagined it as it was described, a conversation, a dialogue. It's something I've done before, and I knew it was going to be different just because of the people who are involved and because of Tom and Pankaj's involvement, obviously. But I sort of assumed it to be a different iteration of the kind of conversations and dialogues and debates that I've had with people in the past that tend to be, even if not hostile, at least adversarial, right? That at least we're kind of on two sides of the argument and we're trying to win by making the best case for our argument. And what I have found a revelation over the past 5 days is that, number one, not a surprise, that mode of dialogue is not useful. To try and debate and make your case to win over a small audience is not useful. But there are ways of having dialogues that make you feel not only seen and welcome, but heard. This is how I felt over the past 5 days. I have felt heard. And the way I have felt heard isn't because people listened, which they did, but because they asked questions that showed that they were listening. And I honestly don't think I've ever had that before. I have never had that experience before. When you come to people with a different perspective, the incentive that they have is to kind of try and reassert their own perspective as opposed to yours and try and dismiss it and sort of interrogate it. And here there was none of that. There was just an active listening and lots of questioning. And as a kind of foil to that was the highlight of my time here, which is the student workshops and the student lunches. The foil for that kind of active listening, to use a cheesy psychotherapy quote, the foil for that active listening was the student's sense of urgency. It felt like this is we've been saying this is repetitively over the past 5 days, that this is a moment, it's a moment, it feels like a moment. It feels like the end of something and the start of something else. And they came to us with a huge amount of anxiety, of uncertainty, of understanding that something was ending and they were the generation that was going to go out in the world and start this new thing. And they had no idea how to go about it. It was about foreign policy, it was about the housing market, the job market, and broadly a whole model that is delivering less and less. And they were looking for ways to build that model, scope out that model, try and figure out what that could be. And so in the background, we were having these dialogues and these conversations, and it felt to me like the start of trying to figure out that new model, not just for them, but globally, because we're not coming with the answers either. And so it felt like the beginning of a model building exercise in that kind of meeting of urgency, understanding of the importance of this moment, and as a foil to that, the kind of earnest, active listening to what other people have to say. So I'm very grateful for that. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Nasreen. Thank you. Thank you for very eloquently sharing, your impressions. We tried to do different things this week. ways forward in a divided world, to have conversations like the one you just witnessed that did have some points of tension, which is good, but not just. There were efforts to reframe, to look beyond, to listen, as you said, on all sides. So I think there, it's a model. It's a model in progress that we can build on. Also, the United States was a theme throughout. The 10 dialogues we had, the discussions with students, where this country is at this particular moment, and the necessity of learning to listen to and learn from other thinkers, other cultures, and countries. That's a theme I think we built on successfully. But I also want to, in conclusion, mention another goal that Pankaj and I had, which was bring together 6 really fascinating people that we can learn from and who can learn from one another, as well as enriching the dialogue and debate here. And Nesreen, Kohei, Veronica, Eche, Ranjit, and Mohsen, we're really grateful that you spent a whole week here. We worked you really hard. You're still going strong. Let's give them a round of applause. Yeah. Just a quick acknowledgement that this has been a team effort on different levels. Different schools and programs have sponsored different parts of this, have sponsored the whole. That's all in the program. We've had the New York Review of Books as a media partner, and the Laboratory for Global Performance and Politics. Derek Goldman and his team have done a wonderful job with the interludes, the dramatic interludes, which have really dramatized some of the points we're trying to make up here in more discursive fashion. So thank you to all of you. I especially, in closing, want to thank my remarkable team at the Berkeley Center and in my office for global engagement here at Georgetown. You can only imagine the amount of work that has gone into this, a beautiful website, the events themselves, all the guests that we've brought here. It's been a great experience. I want to mention them by name: Nick Scrimenti, Siobhan Cooney, Shimong Tong, Will Portillo, Lauren Fretz, Mary Gordon, Julia Murillo, and especially I want to call out our events coordinator, Imogene Johnson, and our communications director, Amy Vanderfleet. So please give them a round of applause. So what do you think, Pankaj? A final word? Stay tuned, I suppose? Or? Yeah. Stay tuned, and thank you. Thank you for sharing the dialogues with us.